Welcome to Unlike the Intersections, the podcast where intent, impact, and inquiry inspire our conversations. I'm Dr. Philip Brown with my good friend Dr. Terry Jackson, and you're at the intersection. Fascinating thing about intersections, we all go through many intersections daily. The way we navigate these determines the trajectory of our days and of our lives. Terry, interesting topic today, and we'll just start it off straight with a question. Are we built to serve?
That is an excellent question. I'm not so sure. When we really peel it back, I'm not so sure if we built to serve or if we built to serve ourselves.
All right. Well, that sounds almost paradoxical. Tell me what you're thinking.
You know, I came across something yesterday that actually raised that question in my mind. Are we built for service? Or is there an ulterior motive around our service? Even though we see people or we see ourselves out in the communities, within organizations, calling ourselves serving. Am I serving for the greater good out of pure altruism? Am I serving because I have an ulterior motive to make myself feel good?
And does it matter? Right? Like, it's a fascinating and deep topic. One of the things that makes me real excited about talking about it, is okay, so it seems like there could be, a polar opposite sort of situation going on where, I'm motivated to do what makes me feel good about myself versus some greater purpose, some greater good. Can those things coexist? Do they coexist? Should or shouldn't they? Lots of questions.
Lots of questions. For the greater good of who? For the greater good of society? For the greater good of me? For the greater good of who is what we have to kind of examine, right? Because if I'm trying to make myself feel good and I want to look good in the eyes of the community, then I'm always out there. But what am I accomplishing? What impact am I truly having?
And to what end, right? Like it really is fascinating, I think, to contemplate it, because my personal thought has always been that to a pretty large extent, as human beings, we all have a connectedness, right? And it's the concept of, if overall conditions get better for anybody, they can get better for everybody. If it's the overall conditions, right? Now we can create little subcultures of all kinds of different things, and there's a history of that. But if we truly are working in the interest of the greater good, we all benefit, including myself. That's a little different than just being self-motivated for achievement on my part. But can the two coexist? I think probably they can, and it's worth exploring a little bit. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of exploration that needs to be, exploration that needs to happen around that, right? And we have to be honest with ourselves. Why am I really doing this? What are my motives? What is my intention? Can my motives be good? Are they bad? What are my intentions? Am I doing this for reciprocity's sake because I'm expecting something in return? Am I just doing it? Is it possible to do anything for the greater good?
Yeah, it kind of, the example that it brings to mind actually goes back to Mike Krzyzewski's book, The Gold Standard, about the Redeem Team. And in it, I think, even though they talk about it in generalities, but it really, I think, applies pretty specifically to this example, is that all those great athletes, the greatest basketball players in the world, had the context of their individual ability. And one of the things Krzyzewski always wanted to do was make sure that each of those people could bring their best ability forward and have it be shown. But the larger perspective was for what? And that was the example that he used in there was that the bigger perspective was that they were representing the United States through the sport of basketball. And so he used the analogy of front of jersey versus back of jersey. So the USA was on the front of the jersey. That was big picture. Back of jersey was the individual names, and yes, they were expected to bring their very best to bear for the bigger perspective of that United States basketball team. Now, the results in that case spoke for themselves, and they did incredibly well. It's a great book. I would definitely recommend it to anybody who likes sports, who likes leadership, who's interested in understanding how that can come together. But I think in terms of being built to serve, that team demonstrated that in that case, those athletes were built to serve the greater good of an outstanding basketball performance representing their country of origin. I
That's
think,
right. That's
in
right.
my opinion, and at the same time they serve their own individual egos by doing what they do and doing it well.
So it did coexist within those teams, and you spoke to motive, intention, ultimately the U.S. Secondary was the name on the back of the jersey, right? So the coexistence of that. But they understood the expectation, the intention, and the motive. And so they served on the team in hopes that they would be recognized as the best in the world. And they were able to gel together collectively, all the egos aside, at least as we saw it from the outside looking in with them winning, not knowing what happened internally. But I would think that what we saw was authentic given who the coach was and his philosophies and the way that the respect that he has from all of those players that he chose. So I think it can coexist. How do we build a better society through service?
What a great question. And I think you included a word in your last section that I think is very important. It came into play in that particular situation. It was respect. And so remember that in that situation, the United States was embarrassed by their previous performance.
Yes.
And they had really, all of a sudden had fallen from a position of clear dominance on the world stage to something much, much different. And so there was a sense of wanting respect. You also had a lot of the best basketball players on the planet. And so they also respected each other for their respective talents. And what Krzyzewski did was he created this environment where those players and Krzyzewski himself agreed to standards that they were all going to live up to. They respected one another, they respected the standards, and they decided that if they conducted themselves that way consistently, that they would see success. And again, results speak for themselves. So when it comes to creating the right conditions, a lot of it has to do with respect for the other folks that are involved in the enterprise, whatever it is, respect for what you're trying to accomplish, and self-respect to deliver your very best night in, night out, day in, day out, a consistency. One of the themes that I always see across performance is consistency. Consistency is critical to long-standing, outstanding performance.
And that consistency, whether it's outstanding performance or performance that is not outstanding, what's common is consistent. They're both consistent, right?
Right. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
both consistent. And so, going back to being built to serve, how do we start? You can see people in the communities when we're young who it appeared that that's what their love was. I'll give an example. I can think of one gentleman that Mr. William Murphy, who ran the recreation center off of 8th Street, Murphy. Daily, I would see him walk to the 8th Street Center to run that facility. Guys went up there to play basketball. Regardless of who you were, when you went in that building, you knew who Mr. Murphy was. There was a level of behavior he expected. And he didn't get much out of it. He got a salary from the city, but it was obvious he was there to serve. He was there to build not only athletes, ball players, but he wanted to instill values to build men who would do whatever. And regardless of who you were, whether you were the best athlete or you were a guy who had a reputation for in the streets, if you will, regardless of who you were when you went in that building, you knew whose building that was. So all of those attitudes and egos were left at the door when you went in there to see Mr. Murphy. And so if there was anyone that I knew that was built to serve, it was him. And that comes from my observation of having seen him from the time I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old up until, his passing. He served a lot of people, and it was evident at his waking and his funeral, where people, wherever they lived, all around the U.S., they came back to pay their respect.
That really introduces a great question in my mind. When we talk about service, is it serving a what or serving a whom? In other words, for him in that scenario, what I heard was that he had this great underlying sense of purpose. That certain things were important for young people to pick up through the medium of sports, and that in order to get the most out of it, there were certain standards that had to be upheld, and he was the rigorous upholder of those standards. And through that sense of purpose to a what kind of, he ended up serving his fellow man through God knows how many opportunities people got by virtue of the discipline that they developed under his supervision. And so, again, it's another one of those things. Is it a what or a who or both? And it seems like in many respects it may be both, because at the end of the day, service is really to people and through people, especially leadership. Leadership is always through people, but serving this higher, more noble idea.
But are we really built to serve? Born into this world as an individual, thinking about our individual needs on a daily basis from a baby to a grown man, we think about self. We think about self. Is it truly possible to serve and eliminate the self?
Yeah, wow. Now you're getting deep on me, because who is the self?
That's right. That's right.
And I really think at the end of the day, where I've landed in my perception is that for the most part, it's really impossible for any of us to to act outside our perceived self-interest at a given time.
Right.
The more difficult question, I think, has to do with, so why is it that you have people who their perceived self-interest is something greater, and other people whose perceived self-interest is more directly traceable directly to what they want at the time. You know, towards self-service in a sense, right? And boy, that's a muddy thing, because you know, it opens up Pandora's box of questioning of, you know, is there a difference? Is there, you know, why is it? But to me, just from a cognitive exercise, is to think through, why is it that some people are more geared toward what seems like a higher purpose than others?
Yeah, that's a great question. Values, environment, vision, imagination, all of that plays a part of how you see yourself serving, whether it's you, the individual, me trying to serve me ultimately, or serving someone else, right? A lot of that has to do with their environment and what you've seen or not seen, that I would think would dictate that, because there are those who may not have seen a lot, but their imagination enables them to be able to say, I want to serve on a large scale. Then there are those who've been around families and organizations where it's just the norm to be able to serve on a large scale level. And then there are those who've been in that same situation who decide they want to become selfish and forget serving the masses of the people. I'm going to serve myself. And we've seen, you know, all of that. The narcissist, we've seen all of that. And so it's interesting because there's so many dynamics that play into it, and you never really know why one is serving.
I think that's fair, you know, and it kind of, something you said triggered in my head, like the far versus go fast
Yes.
philosophy, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
That's right.
You know, and is it as simple as people being wired differently? You know, who knows? And that, of course, we know that's going to track back to their individual experiences and things like that. So, you know, it is hard to know. But one of the things that I think we see in leadership is that companies and organizations that are long-term, highly successful, like beyond the bell curve successful in a sustainable fashion, all have leadership that is humble and serves a purpose greater than themselves in that particular realm. And yes, those organizations, those individuals that are functioning in a leadership role in those organizations do incredibly well on a personal basis. But at the same time, if you look back and really do a deep dive into, you know, the whole trajectory of their journey, it's always about purpose. That organization is. It's always about serving that greater purpose. And so maybe there's just this leap of faith that they've been able to make that says, I'll do better because we'll do better if I can lead with this sense of purpose. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of, you know, to me, it's a fascinating thing. I mean, I can only talk about what makes me feel better as an individual. And I know that has to do with things like team achievement, you know, seeing our collective group do great things. I mean, you know, I know those are the highlight experiences of my life.
You know, one of the greatest awards that I've ever won was an award I won in high school as a senior. And it was Team Before Self. It was the Coach Tompkins Award at the Hoggett High School. Team Before Self. And ever since I won that, I always kind of thought that way. Team before self. And so, and it's interesting as an only child to be given an award, Team Before Self. Because, I tell people, I am an only child. Oh, the first thing is you're selfish. No. It's always been about others. It's never been really about me. I understand that if there's an award or reward or compensation, that's only a byproduct of my service. I think I heard someone say service is the price we pay for the space that we occupy. And so, for whatever reason, I've always wanted to kind of serve. Some selfish, some altruistic, but I've always understood it's bigger than me. For whatever reason, I've always understood it's been bigger than me.
To me, there may be an element of reciprocity there.
Mm.
In other words, I've been given a lot of opportunities, and the price of those opportunities is responsibility.
Mm.
The responsibility to take ownership of somehow making that a little bit better. Ideally making it better on my way out than it was on my way in, but definitely not allowing it to deteriorate. And for me, that has always required more of a horizon view toward purpose than toward self.
Mm.
It takes away any temptation, to hold back a little bit. It takes away a lot of the sort of maladaptive behaviors, because if at the end of the day I know that the good feeling I'm going to get is only going to come about if there's been improvement, then that changes the whole dynamic for me.
I would agree. Anytime I learn anything new, which is on a day-to-day basis, I always ask myself, or if I'm sitting at a table with people that I just have this great respect for, and I'm learning, and I ask myself this question: how can I use this knowledge, this learning opportunity, to help others? What can I take from it that I can help others? That's probably one of the first questions I ask myself. The orientation from that, if I go back to the origin, I don't know if I can put my finger on it. But what I do know is that's how I'm oriented. How can I take whatever I learn for the betterment of others?
And sometimes we get it from our parents, and then you got a chicken or egg, right? Like, so where'd they get it?
Yeah,
And on and on, and it's. I think to me, for folks that are able to act in service a great proportion of the time, there's a humble understanding that we're very small in the grand scheme of things. And when we talk about leadership, in reality, it's not very complex. And there's some real simple principles of leadership, but they're hard to do. And one of the biggest traps that makes those behaviors difficult to execute is when the leader finds himself in a position where the primary reality is them, instead of reality being the reality around the team. And that can be intoxicating for a person. It can fool a person into thinking that maybe they're better than they are. Or maybe they really do have all the answers. But the truth of it is now, contemporary leadership is really more about a relentless pursuit of all the right questions. Whereas, industrial age leadership was more about the right answer. And we find ourselves still in what I'll call a painful transition. because that philosophy of leaders having the answers is not dead.
That's right.
I mean, it's on its path toward extinction, as it should be, and the sooner it becomes extincted, the better, based on the real complexity of everything we do now. But we're in a little bit of a painful transition of what that has to become next in terms of leadership, and how we use the right language to ask those questions and to get to the best answers. And when we see that play out, irrespective of the motivators, my belief is that it's going to look like service.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because that's how you have to get it done, right? It has to be about who instead of how, because of the diffusion of decision making and the complexity and increase in knowledge. It has to be about who rather than how. So the most successful leaders are always going to look like it's about service to their fellow man, because it's only through the multiple other team members' performance that we get the kind of result we're looking for.
And what it also makes for is everyone has a voice, because it's leadership through inquiry, and you're seeking the voice of everyone, which also leads to it can be nothing but inclusive. Because when you're asking for everyone's voice around what the solution should look like, you're also asking for inclusiveness to be a natural part of the solution. You got everybody's voice, you got everybody serving, and you have everybody being a part of the solution. And therefore, a lot of other things will be eliminated.
And there is a whole lot of how that gets done. Probably worthy of another episode in and of itself, and we've done some things on inclusion in the past. It's more than what meets the eye, and it's certainly more than what you hear in the current rhetoric, right? Because what we're really talking about is, how do you include all the information that you need to have to be maximally successful in whatever endeavor you're doing. That means you got to have context for everything. Where do you get that context? A lot of times context is only available through experience. So it can fundamentally change even the structure of leadership, to the extent that we may need to go through a phase where leadership is no longer the usual suspects, because we've defined the usual suspects maybe incorrectly in the past. It needs to be a blend of what maybe some of the now usual suspects, you know, your MBA trained people, your things like that, versus some people who really have come up through the ranks and know instinctively, in a lot of cases, things that will and won't work based on a series of empirical experiments that they've done over the course of a career. And then you also got to plug that into walks of life as pertain to the clientele you would hope to serve with your business or your organization.
Yes. Too often in our society, we like to place leadership on people who are playing certain roles. They have an MBA, so they're a leader. They're a physician, so they're a leader. They're a politician, so they're a leader. Not necessarily so. It's the personality, not the position, that makes one a leader. I have a tendency to think that most politicians are not leaders. They're politicians, and they're looking to win the next election. So they're going to say whatever they have to say and do whatever they have to do to win the next election. That doesn't mean that they're a leader. A leader is about doing the right thing at the right time. And politicians, we know, may not necessarily do the right thing at the right time. Just because you're in a position, you may not necessarily do the right thing. Just because you have a title, because you earned a degree. It's about bringing all the voices together to get something done, the ability to execute, right? And so we have to get away from this person is in this high position, so this person has to be a leader. No, that doesn't make them a leader because they're there. What makes them as a leader is their ability to galvanize, organize, and mobilize people for a purpose.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You can definitely lead from anywhere inside an organization, and in fact, we have to have leaders all over. You know, that's that. The fundamental job of leadership is creating leadership, creating a culture of leadership, so that people take ownership, complete ownership of what their responsibilities are and the consequences to others and themselves based on the performance. When that happens, number one, the performance is consistently better, can move toward being consistently great. But the other thing is there's the reward to the individual for that good service. And that may take the form of compensation, that may take the form of advancement opportunities, that may take the form of congratulations from other people, that may take the form of other appreciation. It can be a whole lot of different things, but it fundamentally cycles back to it's human nature to feel good about ourselves when we accomplish things. And maybe those things are for people, maybe those things are tasks, but there is a human nature component that feels good when that happens. And when that feel good happens and you add things on like compensation or cheering and congratulations for a job well done, it just continues to further build that energy, and it builds upon itself, and that positive energy carries forth through an organization. And then you're beginning to see what it feels like to be part of a culture that's bigger than you, but a culture that is profoundly positive and has a chance to be great over time.
I would agree. And I think built to serve, are we built to serve? I think that's for others to determine and to answer. I don't think that one can step into service themselves and say, I'm built to serve. Right? I think others see the works of people and say they're great servants. And so I want to give them opportunities to serve. And so people call on you to do certain things that enable you to serve because they understand that it's built to serve. I just don't think, I think it's selfish when one say, you just step up and call yourself a servant.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It kind of brings me back in my thinking to Dr. Rao, right? And it would be, so how do you become service?
I'm going to say the examination of what you think service looks like to you. More importantly, the examination of what you think what service looks like. Not necessarily to you, but what service looks like. That means the examination of your mental model around what service actually is.
And it seems that could change by context, right? So
Yes.
Depending on a particular role you were playing at a given time, that definition could shift
Yes.
at some point. And and so you would be consistent in whatever the context was.
Yeah. It's a topic that is very interesting. One that makes you think, because you hear organizations that we're a service organization. Are you really?
Yeah, serving what?
Yeah, and who are you serving? Yeah, exactly. And especially when it comes to nonprofit organizations, they're always talking about service. Well, who are you serving? What are you serving? Again, what are your motives? What's your intention? And how are you serving? Do you have the right people, the right who's to serve? Let's take a look, at the people who you have that you call those who are serving. And sometimes we find that some of the people who are serving have some serious ulterior motives.
Back to the original question, right? We've come full circle back to the paradox of, are we built to serve? And we could just as well divide that up and say, are some of us built to serve?
Yeah.
Or, who knows? Again, to me, this thing comes down to, like so many things, it requires a lot of thought.
Mm-hmm.
We have to continuously examine what we're doing, because there's another human tendency to think that we're serving a greater purpose because that's what we intend to do, but perhaps our intentions aren't a match with the impact we're having at a given time.
That's right.
And again, that requires a lot of times outside feedback.
That's right, because we have blind spots.
Big time.
Yep, and with those blind spots, it could be we think we are true, all altruistic servers, when at the end we're looking for some prize for ourselves.
And you get to the situation of the win-win. That's the common thing you hear a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that there's nothing wrong with benefiting from service.
Right.
That's really good when things work out that way. I like to think that happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it happens a whole lot in the most high-performing organizations.
Mm-hmm.
That the people inside the organization prosper in every dimension,
Mm-hmm.
parallel to that outstanding performance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Versus other organizations where you have haves and have-nots,
Mm-hmm.
and different kind of sort of hierarchies of how well the needs are being met.
Mm-hmm. And that's how you determine real service, when you start looking at those hierarchies and you think,
Right. Does a higher tide really float all boats?
That's right.
Does it float all boats to the level of the tide, or does some not quite float as high?
That's right. That's right.
Fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it calls for a lot of in-depth thought.
Well, we hope that our listeners will do a little in-depth thought based on this discussion of Are We Built to Serve? If you want to see more of our episodes, it's unlikelyintersection.com, or you can find Unlikely Intersections on Facebook or YouTube. You can find me at docphilipbrown.com. And Terry?
You can find me at Terry Jackson, PhD. And if you're interested in Dr. Brown and I coming out to your organization and having a conversation around those topics that are challenging your organization, feel free to reach out. We'd be more than happy to do so.
We'll see you at the next intersection.